Hello, this is Paul Jansen from United Reformed Church in Somerville, New Jersey. This is the weekend of October 22nd, 2023. For those of you who follow the lectionary or the narrative lectionary, I might say I'm a week off, but there's a reason for that. I'm going to be going over the story of Ruth this week and the whole story. So I'm not going to select out a particular passage from the book of Ruth. I encourage you to go read it, but I'm going to pretty much give you the whole thing and a little bit beyond, just in telling you the story. So the story, I think, boils down to a sigh and a fable. A sigh and a fable. A woman's sigh and the fable she tells her child. Now, to get the meat of why she tells this story, why it's important, we have to go into a little bit of context. So, here we go. At one point, the people of God who lived in Judah and Jerusalem had been taken over by people from far to the east, by the Babylonians. And after the Babylonians took over, it was their policy to deport everybody to their country, make them march through the desert in this case, and settle them in this new land. And it was in this new land, you may remember, by the waters of Babylon. There we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion, where we used to be, and they tried to make us sing our customary folk songs, and we said, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And we hung up our lyres, our harps, on the willow trees because we refused to sing. So that was what was happening then. Well, they were there for a little while, but after they were there not really all that long, another regime came and took over, where the Babylonians had been in charge, and these were the Persians, and now the Persians took over, and Cyrus, the Persian, who curiously was called a Messiah by some, but anyway, Cyrus, the Persian, sent the people back to Jerusalem, back home. And on the way home, they sang all kinds of songs, including things like those who went out bearing seeds for sorrow will come back bringing sheaves of rejoicing. So they were happy to go back to Jerusalem. Except when they got to Jerusalem, it was in shambles. It was a mess because, well, it had been in a war not that many years before, after all, and it wasn't rebuilt very well. And so when they got back to Jerusalem, they began encountering some questions that they hadn't had to encounter before. Some of the folks, when they were over in Babylon, which then became Persian, some of them had decided, well, this is going to be our life, I guess, and they had taken Babylonian or Persian wives and had children who were part Hebrew and part Babylonian or Persian. And they would come back, and they were now in Jerusalem, the holy city of God. And there were other people in Jerusalem as well. You see, a city doesn't just sit vacant for 30 or 40 years. People move in because, look, there's available housing stock here, and there are roads already made. So what had happened was that people from the north, the Samaritans, people from Samaria, had moved down into Jerusalem. And when the Hebrews came back, you know, the Samaritans stood up on the wall and pelted them with rocks, saying, "Get out of here, it's our land now." And the Jerusalemites, the Hebrews said, "No, it's our land." And so, well, you got to be this big fuss. And so, well, how are we going to deal with these other people? Are we going to maintain our heritage by our men marrying only Hebrew women? Or is it possible that they could marry a Samaritan woman? Or what's going on there? And one of the most important priests, named Ezra, got up and told the people, no, we're not going to have any of this intermixing nonsense. No. If you're Jewish, you marry a Jew. And furthermore, if you're Jewish and you had married a Babylonian or a Persian, you got to ditch them and your children because they don't belong in God's family. And it's at this time that the story of Ruth is told. It's not quite said at the same time, but you'll see why it's important. Now, to the story of the woman and her sigh and the fable she tells her son. One day, her son comes home from playing with his friends. He says, every day I play with my friends, but this day something had happened that hadn't happened before. This day, one of the older boys had said to not all the young kids, to the young Hebrew boys, he said, you can't play with those Samaritan boys. You can't play with those Canaanite boys or those, quote unquote, it's a horrible phrase, but those half-breeds or whatever. You can only play with fellow Jews. That's the way it is. That's the way God wants it to be. That's the way my dad said it's supposed to be. So this little guy says to his mama at bedtime, says, Mama, so-and-so says that we can't play with these other kids. They're just my friends. I've always enjoyed playing with them. Why can't I play with them? The mother sighs. My, she'd kind of known this was going to come all along. But now it's the time for her to tell her son a story, to talk about what she and her family stood for, to tell the little fella a broader picture of their faith, broader even than the priest Ezra. She's going out on a limb here to tell this story. But this is the story she tells. Once upon a time, she tells her son, a Hebrew woman and her family, they were living in hard times because there wasn't any food around here. There was no food. So they had to go somewhere else to find food. And where they went was that they went down south to Moab, because down in Moab they had food there. So while they were down there, the man and the woman had two sons. And the two sons took wives from Moab. And, well, this is where the story gets pretty sad. First one son died, then the other son died, and then the father in the family died. So now you have three women, none of whom are related to each other by blood of any kind. One woman, the older woman, the mother-in-law from Judah, and these two young women from Moab. It's kind of a strange family, isn't it? They're there together for a while, and at some point, the older woman, the mother-in-law, hears that, there's food back in Judah again, so it's probably a good time for people to go back. And she probably knew other people who had decided to go back, and she said, well, I guess I should go back too. And she calls her two daughters-in-law together and says, now you just stay here in Moab. I got to go back home with my people, but you stay down here with your people. You'll find somebody else to marry. You'll be happy. I don't know if I'll be happy, but I'll be back with my people anyway, so you stay here. And one of the girls says, okay, I'll stay here in Moab. The other one says, oh no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to come with you. I'm going to come with you to Judah, to Bethlehem. And your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Now I'm going to be with you forever. In fact, even after we die, we'll be buried one grave next to the other. Well, that's quite a story. But that's where they go. They go back to Judah. The mother's name is Naomi, and the daughter-in-law's name is Ruth. That's where the name of the book comes from. So they go there, and I told you that there was food in Judah again, and one of the owners of one of the fields was a fellow named Boaz. Now, Boaz needed workers for his fields, and Ruth needed work. So you can guess who went out into one of Boaz's fields and worked. Well, Ruth was apparently a rather attractive young woman, and Boaz took a shine to her. I'll put it in that kind of old-fashioned way. She caught his eye, and at the end of the hard day's work, she went back and told her mother-in-law, Naomi, she said, boy, This is what happened. I caught the eye of Boaz. And Naomi says, well, this is an interesting development. Tomorrow, when you go back to work, at the end of the day, after he's gotten drunk and he's lying in his tent, why don't you go into his tent and lie down beside him and, well, here the story gets a little bit racy. It's maybe not fit for child's consumption, but okay. That's what she told Ruth to do, and that's just what Ruth did. At the end of the day, she got herself washed up and cleaned up again and pretty looking, and Boaz, as he would, drank a bunch of something fermented anyway, and went down in his tent and lay down, and Ruth entered his tent and lay down beside him. And when Boaz woke up, he said, "Whoa, who's this beside me? When I went to sleep, there wasn't a woman here, but there's one now." And sure enough, there she was. And Ruth says, "Don't you remember me? I'm Ruth." And, "Oh, yeah, I remember you. I remember you." He'd like to marry her, but he can't. Now, why can't he marry her? Well, they had a custom that there was somebody else who was in line first to marry the widow of the son of Naomi's husband. There, that got a little complicated. Ruth had to be married to somebody else. Somebody else had a claim, first claim. So now what are they going to do? Well, it so happens that the person who had a first claim was a kind of a big shot, owned a lot of land, and he was always looking for more land. So Boaz says to him, "Have I got a property for you?" You see, Naomi, the one who lost her husband and 2 sons down in Moab, Naomi has this piece of land, and I would like to sell it to somebody who's interested in becoming even richer. And the fellow who had first claim on Ruth, he said, well, it sounds like opportunity's knocking here. So he says, well, I'll buy it. Yeah, I'd like to have some more land for my property holdings. And Boaz says, well, that sounds like a good deal. There's just one thing. If you want to buy this land to redeem it on behalf of Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, if you want to buy this land, you got to take Ruth along with it. Boaz knew what he was doing. he sucked the guy in. And the guy says, Ruth? You mean that Moabite? He goes, yeah, she's a Moabite. She's a foreigner. She's not one of our people. Guys, oh man. I don't know if I want to do that. My life's going to get awful complicated if I do that sort of thing. I don't think our people should stick around with those kinds of people. And so, yeah, that's too much for me. I'm not going to do that. Boaz says, well, okay, but I want to make sure that everything's done right here. So in order to do this, you need to release Ruth to me. And you need to release the land to me so that I can buy it. I can redeem it. And I can maintain the name of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. Okay. So he does that. And as was their custom in those days, when they made a business deal of this kind, the fellow who gave up his right to buy the land took off his sandals and gave it to Boaz, so that everybody who was around could see what was going on, and they could witness it, and they would know that Boaz hadn't really snookered him out of anything, that it was a legit deal. And so it happened. Boaz bought the field and Boaz and Ruth got married. Yay, that's wonderful. And not only did they get married, then they had a child before very long, a child named Obed. And, well, that was a big deal because Naomi, who had always hoped to have children, never did have a grandchild before, excuse me. She'd had 2 boys, but she had always wanted a grandchild. And now she has a grandson. Oh, those of you who are grandparents, you know what a big deal that is. And she has her grandson, and then her grandson has a son. Okay. And then her grandson's son has a son. And his name is, wait for it, his name is David. David of Bethlehem. David, one of Jesse's many sons. King David. The greatest king that the people of Judah, the people of Israel ever had. The great King David, the one who we have the Star of David these days. King David was the, great grandson of a Moabite woman. How's that? Remember, this is a mother telling her son, when this son is confused about who gets to hang out with whom, can I have friends who aren't Jewish? And she says, listen, my son, our greatest king was only a few generations removed from a woman from Moab. Now you go back and tell your friend that story. See who you can hang out with or who you can't hang out with. Tell your friend, we don't know how God decides to bless the world through us. Maybe it'll only be through our people. Maybe God will use other kinds of people to come in as well. Tell your friend not to be so cocky. Maybe you can tell your friend that, well, Ezra doesn't have all the franchise on the knowledge and the wisdom and the grace of God. So she sighed and she told her son that fable. The fable of the joyous grandma and the man with one shoe. What a story, isn't it? What a crackling good story the story of Ruth is. And a story that still reminds us today, we don't always know. We don't always know whom God will choose to do God's work, or through whom God will bless the world. So maybe we should be a little careful and not so cocksure about God loves my kind of folk or some particular kind of folk. Jesus said, I have sheep who are not of this fold. The Apostle Paul said, in Christ, neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, no male and female. I could go on citing these examples all day. The arc of the scriptures is rather long, and it bends toward including more and more delightful, different kinds of folks into a throng that will one day gather before the throne with all kinds of tongues and languages singing, salvation belongs to our God and to the Lamb. And you, my friends, are part of that story. You get to live that story in your own life. So, isn't that cool? Isn't that wonderful? That's good news for you this week. That's the whole story of Ruth. I hope I got all the details correct. If I didn't, by all means, comment. And that's it for this week. Now, I'm going to be off for a couple weeks now and won't be returning until it will probably be November the 12th. And so have a wonderful time. I encourage you to watch the live stream at United Reformed Church, because we'll have different preachers on the 29th and the 5th, the 29th of October and the 5th of November. Until I see you again, may God bless you and keep you. May the Lord's face shine brightly upon you, and may you enjoy the Lord's deep peace. See you next time.